Hello and welcome to another episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. Microsoft Mentors is designed to lift the lid on the career journeys of the most successful leaders in the Microsoft ecosystem and to share their knowledge, insights, experience and expertise with the wider Microsoft community, offering mentorship at scale. Each week I'll be having open and honest conversations with technology leaders, business owners and technical experts from across the world of Microsoft tech and unpicking their past routes to success, their current models for personal and professional growth and advising you on how to develop the next steps of your cloud career. Stay tuned every week, every Wednesday at midday on LinkedIn Live and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Let's grow together. This week on Microsoft Mentors, the podcast, I'm joined by Richard Cheney. Richard is the Azure Practice Lead at Azure Expert MSP Cloud Direct. He has a career that spans over a decade in the Microsoft ecosystem, having pivoted away from his economics degree into technology, working through the IT channel before landing at Microsoft in a number of different cloud solutions architect roles that focused on helping Microsoft partners develop their proposition within public cloud. He then, in November last year, moved across back into the partner world as the Azure Practice Lead at Cloud Direct. In the conversation, me and Richard dive really deep into his approach to mentorship, both as a mentoree early in his career and how that's informed his approach to mentoring both up-and-coming cloud professionals and more experienced cloud professionals. For me, this episode really hits at the core of what Microsoft Mentors is all about. Understanding the career journeys of successful leaders within the Microsoft ecosystem and offering their advice and experience to deliver mentorship at scale. So I've known Richard for a couple of years. Richard is the Azure Practice Lead at Cloud Direct. I can start off with Richard. It'd be great just to hear a little bit about your role at Cloud Direct at the moment and what that looks like for you, mate, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, I joined here at Cloud Direct back in November last year, and I'm the Azure Practice Lead here. So I'm one of the few practice leads. We've got one for Modern Workplace and another one for Data and AI. And essentially, I head up the post-sales team that gets involved in all the delivery of migrations and app modernization and a whole host of other things that we do with our customers here. We also have a managed services arm as well, which is based over in South Africa. And so we interface with that as well as working with pre-sales and all the enterprise architects and everybody else we have in the business. So yes, it's a good role with a good selection of customers, working in a number of verticals and keeps us very busy.
Yeah. And for people that maybe don't know Cloud Direct, what's your position in the Microsoft world in terms of your solution partner designations, and also maybe just a bit about the size of the business would be cool to know?
Yeah, so I'll start with the size of the business. We're a couple of hundred people strong, pretty much split evenly between South Africa and the UK. The UK office is based in Bath. We are an Azure Expert MSP, and we have all the cloud designations except for Power Platform and everything related to Biz Apps. But we have all the other five. So One Workplace, Apps and Infrastructure. We have Data and App Innovation, Data and AI. So yeah, everything in that area there. We have quite a good range of specializations as well. So, but we pitch ourselves customer-wise as, if you like, more the mid-market type areas. So in Microsoft speak, SMC or major enterprises. So not the very biggest companies, and about sort of moving up from the SMB level to what's that middle strata, if you like.
Yeah, it's interesting actually as well because I've had I think this is podcast recording number 7 now, and obviously where my network sits within the Microsoft space is heavily on the Azure side of things, on the infrastructure side of things, and a lot of the people that I've spoke to in those businesses are similar to Cloud Direct in that they've got the 5 solutions designations, but they've not got the Biz Apps one. And I think that just shows you a little bit about the makeup of the Microsoft partner ecosystem, isn't it? That the Biz Apps space is a world on its own almost.
Yes, and I think if I look at it from a Dynamics 365 perspective, I don't know if we'll step into that because most of our customers are using ServiceNow and other applications already. But Power Platform itself, Power Apps, and everything related to that is definitely of interest to us. So we've got customers we're working with and partners we extend what we do in that space, and I think that's where we're going to expand. But we're definitely moving beyond just, if you like, infrastructure migrations and working that level to a lot of work around app modernization, a lot of work around data platform, data governance. So that's a really big focus for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to get a feel for, your career, it's moved through lots of different phases. If we take it right back to the start, what was your route into your career in terms of, early education, university, apprenticeships? What did that look like for you, Richard?
So school and university wise, I majored in economics. So that's what I did my degree in, and came away from university with that, and really very little idea about what I wanted to do. But luckily, I lived in Thames Valley, which is very IT centric. Ended up working for a market research company, so I actually started effectively with a data entry role. This is early to mid '90s, so quite a while back now. Show my age now. And as part of that, we had a lot of very manual processes, which, being the impatient youngster that I was, I quickly started automating the hell out of that and working past that, and ended up being put into special projects and a big migration we did onto HPUX systems at the time, and moving on to PCs because that was actually a thing at that point. And then eventually just ended up getting dragged into the systems team and managing Unix servers and SANs across all of Northern Europe, before I then moved into the partner world. So I then started working for the partner that was servicing us as a customer, and eventually became the head of consultancy there, and then worked through a number of different partner organizations before I then joined Microsoft, 8 years ago. Something.
Yeah. Interesting that a lot of people, I think, not even just tech specific, but just generally go through that transition early on where they go to university, they study, X course at university, but then a lot of the time don't end up in, a job role or a career that aligns to that. And it sounds like from your side then it was, did you always have like a leaning towards, being technical? Obviously, it sounds like you went into that data entry role and quite naturally decided to automate it. So was that something that was in your, your personal life? Were you a gamer? Were you building PCs in your bedroom? What did that look like?
Yeah, definitely a gamer. Still am. So yes, started off with my first computer was a ZX Spectrum, and I did do some programming on that. But that was, I think, effectively to justify it to my parents that was a sensible thing to do. But it was mainly there for the games, if I'm honest. And that works all the way through university as well. And I think it's quite common, I think, for a lot of people who go to university end up doing something which interests them at the time. That's definitely the case for me of economics. But it doesn't necessarily dictate the direction your career is going to go. In fact, sometimes it's a good way of finding out what you don't want to do. So that's one of the great things about being early in careers. You have the ability to pivot and change to whatever path is most natural for you and really find something which is of interest to you or just naturally meets where your talents are as well. I think that's one of the key things. I did a lot of stuff within maths and had just a very logical brain. So actually when it came to getting to the point of working in the business world, you can see the opportunities to learn new techniques, new technologies, and accelerate things. And I think that always interested me.
Well, it's never been more important to be able to adapt and change with the change of technology, has it, than the public cloud era where there is something happening every day or every week, especially on the Azure side of things, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the key things is to be really good in IT, you have to demonstrate an ability to learn and really challenge yourself because change is that one and only constant. So being able to learn new technologies and show that you can just get up to speed with those and become the voice of authority on some of these things is really important. I think that's one of the key things. If I look back at my history, is what have been the key technologies and learnings that I've done in different phases of my career, and you can see that there's just a natural progression and constant movement towards what I think is the next important thing. And I think you need to be very self-aware of where you are in your career and in your journey, just to make sure that you're making those intentional decisions as to what direction you're going in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's definitely a part of personality profile and sort of thought process in terms of where it, especially in tech, like you said, you've probably naturally, sounds like, got quite a logical, analytical brain. So that probably makes that transition into technology easier for you. I'm the other end of the spectrum, and I'm not analytical or not logical. And that's probably why I've ended up in much more of sort of a softer skill type role myself. So you obviously went into that early role, started then progression into technology, a few different roles in there by the sounds of it. You've obviously ended up where you're at now, and over the last, decade or so, been very, very heavily focused in the Microsoft world. So when did Microsoft technologies start entering your professional life?
Well, in the last days of one of the companies I was working within the channel, SEC, I was heavily working a lot of private cloud technologies, so VMware and some of the OpenShift type product sets. And that's when we started sort of looking at the public cloud offerings and see what they look like. And at that point in time, I first looked at Windows Azure and all the PaaS offerings that sat on there, which was quite basic at that point in time. I'll be honest, I pretty much dismissed it at that point in time. But when I got tapped up by a recruiter to interview for Microsoft, it was at the point where actually the Azure Resource Manager was coming out, and there's a big shift towards the capabilities of the platform. You could tell it was one of those points where things were really motoring towards becoming a bit more of a grown-up platform with some real capabilities on it, and the constant shift of customers towards it. And it was just the pace of change within it was massively outstripping what we're seeing within some of the private cloud offerings, which are still quite basic and frankly quite complicated as well for the amount of value they delivered, whereas the speed to value for using the cloud technologies was just evident from day one. So yeah, as soon as I started working with the technologies as part of getting ready for the interview process, I was actually blown away by the capabilities, and I'll be honest, that's not stopped since.
Yeah, no, it's the rate of change, like we've mentioned, is massive. But that's what makes it such an exciting space to work within, and why it can drive so much value. And I think Microsoft were in those early days of Azure. I think they were just finding their feet in terms of what it was going to look like longer term. Maybe chasing the tails of AWS in the early days, but they're now in a position where it is a technology that has so many uses across, like you say, from SMC all the way through to global enterprise.
Yeah, and to my mind, AWS had that historic strength in the IaaS space, some really good PaaS offerings as well, and there's a good maturity to what they do. I like a lot of AWS, I like a lot of what GCP do as well. But if you look at the strength of where Microsoft are in terms of that collective cloud approach with everything within Entra ID and Microsoft 365 and Azure itself and everything that extends on that, the acquisition of GitHub, I think, was inspired because the integration points you have there. If you look at it cohesively, then it addresses pretty much everything that most enterprises want to do on the platform today. And that's before you start rolling in there the AI integration stuff with what they've done with OpenAI and integrating that. They've obviously started a march on the market with a lot of what they're doing there as well. So yeah, I think it's a good cloud to be aligned with.
And aside from the sort of the technology side of your career, it looks like fairly early you made the decision to move into sort of the channel consultancy, sort of customer facing type roles. Was that a conscious decision from yours? Was that a direction that you felt like you wanted to go in, or was it just opportune that you ended up in that consultancy customer facing type environment?
I think it's just something that became quite natural. I had a bit of a flair for it in terms of doing it. You talked about soft skills earlier, and you can be successful in this industry with the technical skills, but to be really successful, you need to look at the soft skills as much as you do where you are in terms of technical capability. And that was part of it. The original move actually into the channel was actually driven by circumstances. So the company I worked at, I was working there with my wife, and it got taken over by an organisation, and we suddenly felt actually we don't want to have all our eggs in one basket. So decided at that point to move to another organisation just to make sure we were protected there. But in hindsight, it's one of those fortuitous opportunities kind of pushed on you, which is the right direction for me. And I think I had taken the theme of mentoring within this. There's a couple of key managers I had during my period, both before moving into the channel and during my time with the channel. Obviously I had quite a few managers, and I won't be name checking my current manager as well, so he doesn't get too disappointed. But there's a guy called Paul Tong, who was in the formative years, was streets ahead of any of the other managers in terms of really mentoring me and building up my capabilities and doing that. And he did that with a number of people within the business. So in terms of my initial interest in mentoring people, I think he was one of the formative figures that really, really drove that, and seeing that he analysed people in a really positive way and saw where their strengths were, saw where they could round out their capabilities, gave them the right kind of support. And you can see him actually work differently with different people in terms of getting the best out of them. And he was great at forming really high-performing teams on the back of that, and a genuinely nice guy as well. So he was really key. And moving forward, actually my time when SCC first took over, I had a manager just before that happened, who came from a company called Morse. I don't know if you remember them. So a guy called Keith Munt. And again, in terms of channel expertise, he had just swathes of experience. And so in terms of soft skills and how to work with largest enterprises and work with programs and senior supply, and some of how to approach different projects and manage expectations and do presentations, there's a whole host of stuff there which I took on board and absorbed from him, which I've then used and passed on to other people as well. So you take something from everybody you work with. I think colleagues, customers, managers, you take different bits which work for you, and you kind of the sum of all those experiences, if you like. That I look for a couple of the key individuals which have really changed how I work and how I work with others. I think that they're the two.
And do you think for anyone looking to develop their sort of soft skills, consultancy type skills, and whether that is in a formal consultancy role or whether that's just consulting stakeholders within the organisation that they work within. Obviously, on the technical side of things, it's fairly straightforward in that you get technical experience, especially in the Microsoft space. You can use certifications to learn and develop those skills. Probably much more difficult on the sort of soft skill side of things. So do you think having either mentors or colleagues that you work closely with to sort of learn from their experiences and their approaches is probably the best way to sort of develop that skill set for yourself?
Yeah, I think that I've had a mix of personal mentoring around soft skills and also formal training on presentation or meeting customer needs and challenging customers on things as well. So a number of different things which have changed how I approach customer work. But in terms of working with the staff that are reporting to me and other people within the businesses, then I think it's just getting close to how they work and looking for ways that they could think about things differently or approach something a certain way or show that kind of customer empathy that you need to do, make sure that you're landing messages in the right way, and again, being intentional about what you want to get out of meetings or presentations in terms of what people take away from those sessions. So I think once you get in a way of thinking about how to approach those, then it changes how you do it. So it's not just straight technical and a bit dry. It's there to achieve something specific. And I think once you have that, then some of it falls out of it. There are challenges now as well. So obviously we're doing a lot of stuff remote, and the adoption of Teams with in-house and with the customers is ubiquitous. And that changes how you work, and getting visibility of how people work within that context, how they present, how they organize stuff, how they create materials for customers is a big part of that. You need to work out ways as a manager of getting close to that so you can actually see how things are working and how you want to standardize, how you want to improve things and round out how they approach it.
Yeah, and it like you say, the shift to a more remote-based model generally across the industry has totally changed that. I think where face-to-face meetings, and you'll probably have experiences of it, so sometimes the biggest outcomes from face-to-face interactions aren't actually in the meeting itself. It's in the corridor leading up to it, or it's in the coffee chat afterwards, isn't it? And that's something that we do miss a little bit when we're having a lot more interactions remotely. But then we get all the benefits from it in terms of being able to work with remote teams. If you look at, like yourselves at Cloud Direct, and an example, you've got half your team in the UK, half your team in South Africa, and that remote model allows that business model to flourish, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it definitely engenders a different way of working. Some of that could be really flexible and a lot more productive. But you're absolutely right. You do miss out on some of the additional pieces of being face-to-face or being around people. It's much harder to establish a proper rapport with people that you meet infrequently if you're either side of a screen. We mandate that people have their cameras on when they're in meetings, because the amount of communication you do via body language and tone is 70% of what you're saying. Words is only so much of that. So that's a big part of starting that in the first place, and it's much easier to build a bit of rapport where you've at least got your cameras on. But generally speaking, it's still not the same as being face to face with people. So ideally, for some of the bigger customers, if the opportunity is there, I do like to meet people physically at least first time around, because that's better. But to be honest, that's rarer now than it ever used to be.
Yeah, I think that's similar for most people. So your career took obviously that trajectory, eventually landing you, like you said, a recruiter reached out to you and presented the opportunity to go and join Microsoft itself. So what did that first role that you landed in Microsoft look like for you?
Yeah, so all my time through Microsoft, I had technical role as a cloud solution architect, become senior after a period of time, and I was working in the partner group. So I went through a number of different names, so partner development unit and one commercial partner and global partner solutions, but effectively the same team, just structured slightly differently.
It's not like Microsoft to change names of stuff frequently, is it?
Marketing getting involved everywhere. And a big part of that was around partner enablement. So this is, very formative years really when I first started working. There wasn't a lot of materials out there. What we had in Microsoft Docs was pretty scant, to be honest. And in terms of structured training paths, there's a lot of stuff we take for granted now in terms of designations and specializations and Azure Expert MSP. None of that existed. So it was just gold platform, and that was the only competency level that you really had to work towards. So we did a lot of work around actually getting people enabled on the platform and understanding the basics and how to work with their customers and how to automate. So did a lot of work around making use of ARM templates, and then lastly Terraform as well. And just really getting those capabilities within the partner community. So a number of different organizations, Cloud Direct being one of those. And that was great for me because I've always enjoyed, if you like, the training or enablement side of the job and helping customers and partners through that side. Just a natural fit for me in terms of how I work there. Yeah,
and I think that's definitely one thing that's very unique within the Microsoft ecosystem, isn't it? Is that Microsoft are so invested in the partner network, and the investment that they put behind that in terms of both financial investment and time investment and resources to support the partner network to be as good as they possibly can be, so that they can ultimately help Microsoft's customers get the most out of the technology platforms and, I would say, keep up with that rate of change. So your day to day then would have been very heavily focused on working with partners. So was there an element within that where you would try to steer the technical teams within partners, steer them down the right pathway when it comes to how they're building, delivering, what their processes look like when it comes to public cloud? Is that sort of part of the remit?
Yeah, there's definitely a strategic element in terms of talking to partners about what their strategy is, where their opportunities were. So if they had in-house capabilities and there's like a natural organic way for them to grow into learning certain aspects of working with Microsoft Azure, what did that look like? What was their current revenue streams? What would be a natural way to pivot towards cloud to augment what they're doing, or in case certain organizations like Cloud Direct completely pivoting towards cloud as the primary source of revenue. and for their customers, what is the value proposition? What does it look like? So it's been useful for me, having come from a customer and then working through the channel, and then finally end up in vendor, to kind of see all aspects of the relationship from both sides of the fences, if you like, multiple fences there. So that's made it a lot easier for me to draw on some of that experience and talk to those partners as to where I think they have that kind of opportunity. And that's, once you then set out those paths, it's just a question of making sure they're enabled to do it. So a lot of specific technical training, but we always looked for opportunities to do that at scale. So if we do one-to-many and involve multiple partners, we would do that. If we could get reusable materials, so we would do that. If we could make it public, then we would contribute to the repositories or Microsoft Learn or the Azure Citadel site that I used to run. In fact, it's still out there. So anything which helped people at scale is really just to maximise the impact.
And was that within a specific sort of size and scale of partner, or was it sort of fairly broad in terms of the types of partners that you work with?
It was fairly broad, and it really came down to potential, I think, more than anything else. So, we worked with global SIs, Tata and other big organisations. We worked with advisories, so KPMG and EY and others at that level. Worked with a number of national service integrators, so I said SIs there. So ones which work within countries, so they might be specific around cloud, or they might be a more traditional reseller who's now venturing into cloud as an additional stream. We did a lot of work with a number of different independent software vendors, ISVs, who have got existing product sets and want to innovate new or transport that into the Azure marketplace to make it available. So there's a whole host of different organizations which get mapped within there. And it's really those who show commitment to really changing what they're doing and adopting Azure and driving adoption of the cloud as part of that. They're the ones it works with. So size was an aspect, but it wasn't the defining characteristic. If you want, you get some very large companies who are slow to move. You get some smaller companies who are very fast to move and can make a big difference in a short period of time. You get other organizations where they focus very much purely on Azure, and that level of commitment shows in how they can drive things. So there's a number of different factors that came into it.
And that obviously set you up very nicely then, having that relationship and working very closely with partners to develop their proposition and their position within cloud, to then lead into you where you're at now, which is obviously back on the partner side of the fence and leading the Azure team at Cloud Direct. So I guess with your current role, just in terms of the team and the practice that you look after, what does that look like in terms of the blend of people that you work with, in terms of engineers and consultants and levels? What's the sort of the makeup of that Azure practice at Cloud Direct? Do people feel for that?
We have a mix of people working at different levels. So if I look from the professional services perspective, so people purely within my team, we have a number of cloud solution architects who, SMEs in different areas and work left to right in terms of the customer engagement. We have those who focus purely on post-sales, so senior consultants, associate consultants. And the lowest level there is primarily people who've gone through some of our breakthrough to cloud or apprenticeship type schemes. So we've always been big on making sure that we get people in who've got the capability to learn, as well as mixing them with people who've got the experience and know how to deliver some of the biggest projects, so we can effectively share that knowledge and bring people on. So we have people within the team who've got specific mentoring priority in what they do on a day-to-day basis to help people progress and have that career path. And for me personally, that didn't start when I came to Cloud Direct. It's maybe one of the reasons why I got the job in the first place. But I also did that back when I was working at the customer side of things, the market research company, all the way through what I did with resellers and specifically in Microsoft as well. So I had a few people within the team where I was designated as a mentor. And in fact, I had somebody who also mentored me as a mentor. So they're very structured within Microsoft about having that as something you're doing to help people progress within the business. Because one of the things I found when I joined Microsoft is that prior to that, I'd always been one of the youngest people in the team. Joining Microsoft, obviously, I'd been through time myself, but they do have a real priority to hire young, emerging, strong talent. And obviously, if you work in cloud, You want people who are familiar with that. So for those who didn't have the experience of working with the older technology, sometimes that means they miss some of the theory. Sometimes it means they don't have some of the soft skills or know how to approach something or know how to troubleshoot or something like that. So actually some of those technical and pure soft skills is an area to help mentor different people, regardless of where they're coming from, as to how to approach these things.
And so I guess if we looked at it through the lens of yourself and your approach to mentoring, if you say we've got a specific example of an Azure engineer who's fairly early career, and you're working with them on a one-to-one basis in terms of mentoring them, what's your sort of approach? Do you have a structure in terms of how you look to guide them and manage them through that mentoring process? Is it more of an organic thing, as what feels right at the moment? How does that look for you?
So we have a clear idea about what is going to be their natural path. That's one thing that I'm really keen on, is that people work out where they're going to fit naturally, and we set targets based on that. So for most people, we talk about T-shaped consultancy in terms of having a breadth of skills around a large number of areas, but have those areas of specialization. And if that then means that we can start working through some of the technical aspirations of where they're heading, make sure they have the tooling capabilities. There's training that we do every other Friday within the group to help level up and standardize on some of the approaches we do. But for the individuals, it's really setting out that path. But you're right, it's not something where you just say, right, do this, and then you'll have completed everything. It's something where you need to go back and you need to address it. So we have that continual learning approach to everything that we do. And actually, when it comes to some of the soft skills, it's much more through observation and then seeing where there's an ability to really change how they work and take some of your experience and basically help them to think about how they approach it. And that's how I tend to do that side of things. Is I don't tell them what to do. I sort of go through what I've seen work in the past and why it's important, and try to get them to think about it. It's very easy to be told something and not understand the importance of it. And I think once you get to 2 or 3 levels of why, we always used to talk about 5 levels of why when we're speaking about customer requirements, and I think it's the same with some of the soft skills. If you can drill into the reasons why it's a good way to approach it in a certain way, what it means for the customer that you talk to about something, how that's going to impact what they do next, then you can start thinking about, okay, what do they need from a session to make it work properly, and then structure it so that you've then got a natural flow and you're landing certain messages, rather than something we're just going through a whole set of material. Or it's about how you're going to approach something to say, okay, we'll do this for a specific customer, but actually we want to make it so it's modular. It's something which we can centralize, thinking about how it works from a multi-tenanted point of view, how we can maximize the benefit and impact we have across multiple customers. So just make sure that they elevate their thinking or have empathy in their thinking. I think both those things are really key to change how you approach things, rather than being too small in your thinking and just think about the specific technology with the blinkers on and think about it in that current context. You need to step back sometimes and think about that. So that's what I try to do, just to make sure that they're seeing things slightly differently.
And I think it's a few interesting points in there, Richard. I think one of the big things that I take from that is, I think there's quite an easy trap to fall into, especially when you become more experienced and more senior in your career, is that there's a trap of falling into saying, well, this is how you should do it because it works, and almost be quite directive in that approach. And especially when you're looking at it through the lens of mentorship, mentorship should always be about empowering the individual to do it for themselves and giving them the skills and the direction to go in, but not giving them the actual, this is, you have to do it this way, this way, and this way. It's about creating that independent thought process, isn't it? So that then enables them to grow and develop, and then eventually become more self-sufficient and not need as much support.
Yeah, well, we definitely don't learn by getting things right first time. You always learn by getting things slightly wrong, then working out how to get it right next time. And I think that's one of the strongest learning areas is to do that. In fact, if you look at the way that Microsoft used to approach the open hacks, still exist, they are basically a set of targets, and it's supposed to be painful, because if you're working through the materials and you're getting stuff wrong and you have to hunt things down and work out how to get it right, it's not the same as just following a set of instructions where they say, right, step 1, do this, step 2, do that. If you do that and everything works, then you think, oh, that was a nice little tour around the technology. But actually, if you have something like the Open Hack, where it is a bit more open in the way that it's approached, and it is just objective based, and you just have the links to the materials, then working collectively as a team, you have that struggle to get through it. And I think by going through that struggle, you're much more likely to remember everything you've learned within those sessions. And it's a bit the same with a lot of the soft skills. When you're approaching something, then you're much likely to remember a good way of doing it if you understand why it didn't work first time around and why a change in approach will make it work better next time around.
And do you think, I guess the lens that we've kind of been looking at it through there is probably someone that maybe earlier in their career. How do you think the mentor and mentoree relationship changes as people get more experience? So you mentioned that you've got, cloud solutions architects in your team that are probably 10, 15 years experience in their IT career. They're SMEs and experts in what they do in Azure. How does that mentoree differ at that sort of level?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of key things we're trying to drive with those who are a bit more experienced career-wise. One is not to constrain themselves by their job definition or where they fit within the business or which technologies they've been historically aligned to. So we specifically look to blur the edges of those things. So if they've got something to contribute where actually they can get involved in something at a different part of the life cycle, or if I've got somebody within my team, we don't cover data now, but one of the guys within the team has just passed DP600, so he's now working on Microsoft Fabric and stretching into that. So we try to be flexible in some of that so that we don't put people in boxes. So that's one part of it. So for those who've historically been in those boxes, it does open their eyes as to, okay, where should I be going next? And how do I review where I am and what that path looks like? The other part of it is that once you've been working for a period of time within the industry, you have certain ways of working. And it's very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks, but getting people to be aware of where they are working in a specific way, quite often that's a good thing. They've learned some good habits and they want to reinforce those and maybe pass those on to somebody they're mentoring. Likewise, if they're doing something where that's the way they've always done it and you want them to really reflect on that and think, why do you do it that way? What's the benefit of doing it that way? Are there other ways of doing it? And then really looking at it from that perspective is a good way of getting people to check on their behaviours and their approaches and what they do, and get a bit more consistency in how you do things. And I think that's part of the journey we've seen within Cloud Direct over the last year or so, is moving away from a technology and if you like, a simpler project focus to something much more enterprise approach in terms of how you work with the business and drive those business outcomes. You need to change your mentality and ways of working to make sure you're working and thinking at that level, and then everything else then falls out of it. So making sure that people are really not just approaching things in the way they've always done, but looking at it from those perspectives is really important.
Yeah, it's a very similar point. Actually, I did a podcast last week. It was released last week with John Saville, and he said something very, very similar.
One of my heroes. I love that guy.
Yeah. He's it was a good podcast. That if you've not listened to it yet, have a listen, because he's crazy. He gets up at 2 a.m. every day and works out for 3 hours.
I'll tell you one of the things that I really like about the way that John approaches things, because I've done a lot of materials for training myself, and so if you look at the way he structures his materials, it's really interesting. So he has a mixture of theory of whiteboards, he has demo stuff there as well. But he always takes you through some of the core concepts first, steps through in a really logical order, some of that, and how it then filters down to how you approach things on the decision points, as well as going around all the different possible configuration and product aspects of something. But there's a real clarity of thought in the way that he approaches that. We can see as he's gone and learned it himself, he's never lost sight of what that process was like for him, so he can then replicate it for the people that he's talking to through his channel. And I think that's an interesting way to think about things, because it's very easy when you get too close to a technology or too used to a technology to actually backtrack and then think, okay, what does it feel like to somebody who's new? So if you can do that, particularly when you're mentoring people as well, I think there's a parallel there too as well. So I think that's key to being successful. You need to, again, it comes down to a bit of empathy, it comes down to a bit of emotional intelligence in terms of seeing it from their perspective and coming into something which is new to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point that you made and John made and lots of people have made to me during my time in the Microsoft world is that the trap that you don't want to fall into is going into those customer conversations, whether that's, again, an external stakeholder or an internal stakeholder, is going in with too much of a fixed mindset of what the technical outcome is going to be at the end of it. The process before that is there for a reason in terms of understanding what the business need is, what's the business challenge, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve from that. And then that will dictate and guide you towards where the technology solution needs to be and will end up. But don't start at the end because you want to put in, the latest and greatest fancy Kubernetes, Azure Kubernetes services with PaaS, etc. That's great, and that might be the final outcome. But don't get blinded by wanting to follow the technology trend. Base it on what the business requirement is from the customer, whether that's internal or external.
Yeah, I do tend to approach some of the first meetings, discovery type sessions with customers, with a lot of open questions and open ears. And I think that's really key, is to get them talking as much as possible and to pull out what they're trying to drive in terms of being successful, some of their challenges and getting there. And if you're not listening for the first half of the meeting, you're diving in too quickly. And I think that's generally a good rule of thumb to make sure that you're putting out, because it's very easy to dive in too fast and steer it to what you think it's going to be. And it might be the right answer, but you are not showing that level of emotional intelligence, and you're not showing that you're basically acting on behalf of the customer at that point. You're not showing that level of empathy again, in terms of understanding where they're coming from and what they need to do. You're talking about yourself and what you can do rather than what they need. And you don't really understand what they need unless you give them the space to talk through that and really pull out that detail.
Yeah. And I guess if we start to look sort of a little bit further down the line, I guess with yourself and Cloud Direct, in terms of your customers and where their sort of needs and want to go, where are the sort of the big trends, would you say, within the Microsoft tech space that customers are wanting to talk to you about? What sort of transformations are they looking to drive? What's your view from Cloud Direct's sort of perspective on that, where it's going to go over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so you can see it in the investments we're making in the different parts of the business right now. So if I look back historically, where our strengths have been has been around some of the really profitable natural parts of adopting cloud in the first place. So setting up landing zones, migration projects, moving virtual machines, managing virtual machines, simple PaaS services, automation around that, and skills around that, managed services around that. A lot of ABD as well. So that's been big, strong suit for that. There's been lots of other projects as well dealing with other technologies, but that has been the bread and butter, if you like. Going forward, it's really elevating the managed services to make sure we're meeting the various different demands of customers in terms of what they want to out-task to a partner. So something which is far more proactive in the way that works. And then from professional services, it's really investment into where those customers are going next. So we have investing a lot around modernization. We're investing a lot around data platforms, specifically data governance, both for Azure resources and for those sitting within SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft 365 more generally. And getting AI ready has been a big part of that as well. So a lot of customers are testing the water with AI and seeing where it can mean something for them, particularly around the generative AI approach. Part of it is obviously the content stuff has been around for a few years now. But in terms of having, again, the right strategic direction and constructs in place to make sure that you're set up for success when you go at a greater scale with AI is something that customers make sure they don't go into a bit of a cul-de-sac now. So that's also part of the thinking. But I would say that actually the data governance and app modernization are two of the biggest areas we're seeing. The other part is collaboration as well. So again, come back to the platform aspects, being driven by that desire to get faster value out of the platform and be able to take some of those business processes and natural triggers for things and have that work on the platform without having lots of time to code and take it there. So leveraging that kind of platform to get there faster.
And for yourself personally, and we've spoken a few times throughout the recording about that rate of change, and we're looking ahead now, and there's new elements that are coming into both Cloud Direct, but generally within the market. And we look at Gen AI and things like that, which is a lot of new technologies. So for you personally, how do you try to keep up with that rate of change in terms of your own learning of technologies? Is it certifications for you? Is it blogs and podcasts? What's your sort of go-to resources for that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, I did take the opportunity to rattle through a few certs myself before I joined Cloud Direct, so particularly on the developer side and some of the AI exams as well. So that's put me in good stead for this phase. In fact, I did my refresh for the admin and the architect exams last night as well. That's good.
That's the thing, you can't get away with just doing the exams now, can you? You've got to renew them.
I like the refreshes, to be fair. It's a nice, clean, quick process, and you always pick up a few bits of information on the way. So that part I really like. But we're also stretching out into different exams, particularly driven by what we do around the specializations. So historically, when it comes to DevOps, we've been Azure DevOps House, but we're driving very hard into GitHub at the moment, which is, to be frank, my preferred platform. I prefer to Azure DevOps. So we've got a number of people going through the GitHub specific exams as part of us moving towards that specialization as well. But generally, in terms of taking the AI side of things, it's really looking at where we think most customers are going to be successful. So I think there's three different terms I quite like in terms of how Microsoft look at different parts of AI, if you like. So there's the embedded licenses. Those you basically pay for the seats and you get the Microsoft 365 Copilot or Copilot for GitHub or Copilot for security. So you just purchase the license, you get the value out of those. At the other end of the scale, it's those which are heavily customized. So where you need to drive some specific training models, you need to train on something specific, or you need to customize very heavily what that process looks like, and you're working in AI Studio. There's that aspect. We've got a couple of customers who are talking in that area, but that's a smaller percentage of the opportunity. So I think actually the golden ground is the bit in the middle, what effectively came from Power virtual agents that what about. So anything that's based on Copilot Studio, anything where you're extending the reach and what it's looking at working with vector databases and that retrieval augmentation pattern, so RAG pattern, and effectively landing the Copilot functionality to be more aware of what you know as a business. What do you have in your specific databases for CRM or ERP? What do you have within your SharePoint estate? How do you direct it to specific data sets if you want it to be answering questions on behalf of your customers and exposing that? So I think those specific areas where you can see that it's got a better understanding context of your organization. It's got a better understanding of key things for what it's producing for your customers. That's why I think that the majority of the initial AI work is going to be and where we're concentrating. But it's trying to keep tabs of it because it's such a fast moving area and you learn something and then it gets replaced by something fairly soon after. So how do you keep on top of it? With difficulty is the answer. It's just way too fast moving. So you're almost looking for certain patterns to standardize and become a bit more mature and more frequently used, and they'll be the ones that we pivot around because you want to go mainstream. You want to go through the path most trodden for support reasons and ease of use, to be honest.
Yeah. Do you think both individuals and organisations underestimate the workload around that sort of data and governance side of things to really get the real value out of AI? Do you think a lot of organisations think they can just switch it on and it's going to be this miracle cure and don't realise all the back end work that needs to be done beforehand?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at it. If you take the Microsoft 365 Copilot as most people's entry point to what they're doing, the Copilot for GitHub's my favorite, but that's the one that most people are using and paying the licenses for. Then pointing that additional data set, training up on, say, a set of HR documentation or something of that level, is one fairly clean way of doing it, because if you can curate the data it's looking at, if you can give it that sort of walled garden, if you like, and then you control that, that's one way of doing it, and kind of expand from there. What's been interesting is I read this at the Bath Azure user group fairly recently. Those customers who'd opened it up to look at their whole SharePoint estate, everything they've got within their employees' OneDrive areas as well, and get everything out of the Microsoft Graph and pull that, has very quickly exposed where their data governance isn't where it needs to be. So where it's getting access to data where they think that's not appropriate, and it's down to poor security settings, or it's down to a lack of sensitivity labels, or just general data governance, to be honest.
Yeah.
So that side of things, I think, is going to be of real interest. So the whole AIP and DLP areas, if you like, for the Office areas is going to be a big focus, I think, to make sure that it's a safe set of data for Copilot to start probing and getting into.
Yeah, I think Copilot would have difficulty getting through the logic of my own OneDrive, which is folded up in a very weird and wonderful way that makes perfect sense to me, but I don't think would make sense even to Copilot.
Yeah, I think it also begs the question about how some people have historically stored data. So I've got a big bugbear about multiple versions of a file with the version in the actual file name. I've got any data which should no longer be retained really should be cleaned out, because you want it to look at a clean set of data, and that probably means less data, quite common. Otherwise, it's going to get confused by old documentation versions which don't need to be out there. So there's a definite
you definitely hate the look of my OneDrive then, Richard. Version 1, version 2, version 3. Oh dear. But no, really, really interesting to get your insights right across the board there, both on the tech side of things and also, on the mentoring side of things. You've had a real strong journey by the sounds of it in terms of your own mentors that you've had personally in your career, and then being able to take that and, leverage what you've learned from being the mentoree to then take that to be the mentor. So the next bit is the fun bit, Richard. It's Microsoft Mentors Quickfire Round.
Okay.
I said the other day I need to come up with like a little jingle for this, like they have on Radio 1, where we go into the quickfire round and I press a little button and I get a little jingle behind it.
Yeah.
But yeah, concept simple. So it's 7 or 8 questions focused on lots of different elements. Some around the Microsoft space, some around mentoring, some around you personally, and just short 1 or 2 sentence answers just to get your off the top of your head feeling on it. So the first one to start with is, what is your favourite Microsoft product of all time and why?
I'm going to pick 3 because they work in combination with each other. That's coming from a HPX Linux background, Windows subsystems for Linux combined with Windows Terminal and also VS Code. I think that's just such a beautiful combination of products. Absolutely love Windows Terminal. I'm using Mac OS now, but I have to say, from the Microsoft stable and the approach to open source, definitely those 3.
Cool. What would you say, and obviously we've covered a bit of this, but what's the biggest difference, would you say, from working at Microsoft at the mothership versus working within the Microsoft partner ecosystem?
I think it's a question of scale and approach. You can't work at Microsoft without looking across all the partners and where you can have that kind of broad impact. And that does mean that you're working at a certain level. So definitely you get the ability to focus more on the smaller companies. So I've really liked the fact, since joining Cloud Direct, that you can see some of the recommended paths. You talk about those and people listen, and then things happen and change. So the level of agility in a smaller company and the impact you can have as an individual is far greater than I would say than working in the mothership. You do miss out on other aspects, but that's definitely a bonus.
Yeah. And then flipping more onto sort of the career and mentor side, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to someone that's starting out in their career and they want to be in the Microsoft ecosystem?
Work on the focus on what you can learn and the pace of your continual learning, and be intentional about the path you're taking for that. I think historically people have been appraised on what they already knew. I think when it comes to working within cloud, it's really that ability to learn and show what you could be a master of within 6-12 months, which is far more important.
Yeah. In terms of resources for learning, are there any, we've already mentioned John Saville, but are there any sort of podcasts, core resources that are your go-tos for tech knowledge and learning?
My favourite three, to be honest, I use Microsoft Learn resources extensively. I think they're great, and you can see the level of maturity of those. There's nobody better than John Saville when it comes to explaining concepts. So I know you called him out already, but his session on passkeys, for instance, is a bit of a masterclass, and where 2/3 of it is theory, but it's just such a great explanation of how everything hangs together. The other person I think is really helpful from a developer point of view is Scott Hanselman. So he obviously gets involved in the Azure Friday and leads those talks, so that gives you visibility of a huge number of technologies. But just his approach to development and the way that he advocates with different people is really amazing. So he's a great guy to follow.
Yeah. One thing that we haven't actually mentioned it in the podcast, so it'd be cool to hear your thoughts on it. What impact do you think networking has on a professional's career, whether that is going out and being at user groups in person, networking events, or whether that's just networking through LinkedIn and social media? What impact do you think that can have for people? I
think that it is absolutely key in terms of being long-term successful and getting that visibility. If I look at what happened when I was leaving Microsoft, then it's that network of people that I built up over the years. When you start doing good work with a large number of people, then you become well known to those. And working, frankly, in the area with partners means you get to know a lot of people. So that's, I think, in terms of having that ability to then talk to different people. I've got an interview with somebody later on today, and I'm interviewing somebody tomorrow, and they're both people I've worked with as part of my network as well. So it makes life a lot simpler when you're looking at things from that perspective. And I think it gets you to open your eyes as to what other people are working on, where are they going, what are the hot topics. I think the more that you get involved in the user groups, when you get involved in the LinkedIn communities and start tracking and following people and start contributing yourself, then that whole back and forth is really healthy. And let's face it, LinkedIn's one of the healthier social networks out there compared to some of the others. I think it's really key. Yeah,
I totally agree. And I think it stops you getting stuck in your own little bubble, doesn't it?
Yeah. It gives you and I'll be honest, I've been guilty of not doing as much as I should do in those arenas. So it's something I need to contribute a bit more to.
And then outside of work, Richard, what's what do you spend your time doing? What are your hobbies and interests? What keeps you busy outside of technology?
I'm a Southampton fan, so I got a season ticket, and my son, who's now 21, forgot that we're going to go down together again this year, so that's good. It took me a little while to admit that to my boss, who's a Portsmouth fan, so that was a difficult moment. And the other key thing is I picked up playing bass guitar about a year ago, so I play in a couple of bands, so quite frequently playing in different pubs or people's parties in the area as well. So that takes up a lot of time in terms of practicing. So they're probably the two big things.
Cool. And then final.
Still doing the camping.
We'll have to get you on to do a gig for us for the Microsoft Mentors live party.
Yeah, that won't be happening. Yeah.
And then final question of the quickfire round: if you hadn't been a technologist, worked in tech, what do you think you could have ended up doing instead?
It probably comes down to the mentoring side, but probably a teacher, which would have been horrifically paid, and I hate the paperwork, so that's probably why I've never really gone into it. But there was a period when I was at school where they dragged us I was in sixth form, they helped us teach maths to one of the lower stream groups in the third year senior then. So what was that? Year 9, I think that is nowadays. I absolutely loved it. Again, it kind of hit me the bug of helping people through something, explaining it, and then seeing them grow. And I think you never get tired when you're mentoring people of seeing that progression with the people you're talking to and seeing their appreciation of what happens there. I think that's probably the starting point for this whole thing.
Awesome. Well, we made it through the quickfire round. Awesome. Well, Richard, thanks very much for your time. It's been really interesting to hear a little bit more about your career and your approach to mentoring and helping to bring through that sort of next generation of talent within the cloud space and the Microsoft space. So thanks very much for your time, mate. And I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Ollie. Take care.
Cheers.